6 months after the Council's vote, the first alien surveyor ships entered Earth's asteroid belt. They came without warning, without greeting, and without asking. 3 enormous vessels, each one shaped like a flattened disc with rotating drill arms, dropped out of faster-than-light travel near Ceres and began cutting into the largest nickel-iron asteroids like a butcher carving meat. Humanity watched and said nothing. On Titan, the largest human colony outside of Earth and Mars, Governor Pete Langford received a formal notice from the Council, ordering a 40% reduction in population within 1 standard year. The notice was written in the cold, mechanical language of bureaucracy, as though it were talking about trimming a budget rather than uprooting families. Pete read the notice in his office, a small room with a window that looked out over the orange haze of Titan's methane sky. He set the paper down, pressed his hands flat on the desk, and sat there in silence for a long time. On Europa, the story was the same. Colony Director Maria Reeves was told to begin voluntary relocation procedures immediately. There was nothing voluntary about it. At the Galactic Council, Nate Dawson played his role perfectly. He stood at the human podium during each session and delivered carefully worded protests that were polite, measured, and completely ignored. He used phrases like deep concern and respectful objection. The senior delegates barely looked at him. Valith occasionally acknowledged his statements with a slight nod, the way one might nod at a bird singing outside a window. Pleasant noise, but meaningless. After each session, Nate returned to his quarters and met with Claire. They closed the door, activated their signal scramblers, and dropped the act. 3 more surveyor ships entered the belt today, Claire reported one evening, pulling up data on her screen. They are moving toward the Jupiter Trojans now. At this rate, they will have stripped the outer system bare within 2 years. And the colonies? Nate asked. Pete is stalling on Titan. He's filed 17 bureaucratic objections, each one more creative than the last. Maria is doing the same on Europa. But it won't hold forever. Nate sat down heavily. It doesn't have to hold forever. It just has to hold long enough. He did not say for what. He did not need to. Claire already knew. 8 light-years away, beneath the rust-colored surface of the Nevada desert, Dr. Leo Voss stood in a chamber that did not officially exist. The room was carved from solid rock, 200 meters underground, and filled with equipment that hummed with a low, constant vibration. Banks of computers lined the walls. At the center of the room sat a workbench covered in components so small they could only be seen under magnification. Leo called the project Switchblade. It had started 3 years ago as a defense system, a network of autonomous drones designed to intercept rogue asteroids before they could threaten Earth. The drones were small, no bigger than a suitcase, and they were fast. But their most important feature was that they were invisible. Leo's team had developed a sensor absorption skin that bent electromagnetic radiation around the drone's body, making it undetectable to every known scanning technology in the galaxy. Under Admiral Katie Morgan's orders, Switchblade had been given a new purpose. Megan Holt, a propulsion engineer with red hair and oil-stained hands, had redesigned the drone's engines to allow them to travel at near light speed, using a fraction of the energy that Council ships required. She worked 18-hour days and survived on coffee and stubbornness. Danny Greer, a young signal specialist who had dropped out of MIT at 19 to join the military, built the drone's communication suite. Each drone could listen to every frequency within a 10-light-year radius, record everything, decode it, and send it home through a quantum-entangled channel that was impossible to intercept. Over 4 months, Leo's team launched 312 drones from hidden silos on Callisto, Europa, and the dark side of Earth's moon. The drones slipped out of the solar system like ghosts, spreading across Council space in a web that no one saw being woven. The results came in slowly at first, then faster and faster. Communication relays, defense codes, fleet positions, patrol schedules, trade routes, diplomatic backchannels. Danny cracked the Council's primary encryption cipher in 6 days. He told Leo it was surprisingly simple, like a lock designed by someone who had never imagined anyone would try to pick it. "They've been using the same cipher for 800 years, Danny said, shaking his head. "They never updated it because no one ever challenged them." Claire Sutton received the intelligence through a secure feed and began using it to guide Nate's diplomatic strategy. For the first time, Nate walked into council sessions knowing exactly what each delegate was thinking, what deals they had made in private, and what they planned to say before they said it. He adjusted his protests accordingly, planting seeds of doubt between species that had secret disagreements, nudging tensions that already existed beneath the surface. He did it so carefully that no one noticed. Meanwhile, on Callisto, something much larger was taking shape. General Sam Harlan stood on a metal platform overlooking a cavern that had been hollowed out of the moon's icy crust. Below him, in rows of construction bays lit by harsh white lights, 26 warships were being built. They were not like anything the Council had ever seen. They were small, barely a third the size of a standard Council frigate. Their hulls were angular and matte black, designed to scatter sensor returns. They carried no heavy armor because they did not plan to sit still long enough to be hit. The key was the quantum slip drive. Leo Voss had developed it in secret 4 years ago, a propulsion system that allowed a ship to make short-range jumps within a star system, disappearing from one point and reappearing at another in less than a second. Council ships used long-range FTL drives for travel between stars. But within a system, they relied on conventional thrust. They had no answer for a ship that could simply vanish and reappear behind them. Sam walked along the platform, his boots ringing on the metal grating. He stopped beside a technician named Greg Palmer, a quiet young man with steady hands, who was calibrating the weapons array on the lead ship. "How soon?" Sam asked. Greg looked up. 6 weeks. Maybe 5 if Megan can get the slip drives aligned faster. Sam nodded. "Make it 5. Back on Verath Prime, the Council continued its business as though nothing had changed. Valith presided over sessions with the same calm authority it had always shown. The senior species debated minor policy adjustments and congratulated each other on the success of their resource expansion into formerly restricted systems. Earth's solar system was mentioned once, briefly, as a productive new acquisition. Nate sat through the session with a polite smile on his face. Claire stood behind him, her expression as blank as a stone wall. After the session, as they walked back through the station's corridors, Claire spoke quietly. "Katie sent an update. The fleet will be ready in 5 weeks. Leo's drones are in position. Danny has full signal coverage across the entire sector." Nate kept walking, his eyes forward. "And the Council? They just approved a resolution to expand the containment zone to include human research stations in the Kuiper Belt." Nate was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Good." Claire glanced at him. "Good? Let them keep pushing. Let them think we've accepted it. The harder they press now, the louder the silence will be when the lights go out." Claire studied his face. She had known Nate for 2 years now, and she had watched him change. The idealistic diplomat who had arrived at Verath Prime believing in cooperation and mutual respect was still there, somewhere. But he had been buried under 6 months of humiliation and dismissal, and what had grown in his place was something quieter and far more dangerous. She said nothing more. They walked the rest of the way in silence. In the Nevada desert, Leo Voss sat alone in his lab, staring at a holographic map of Council space. 312 green dots blinked across it, each one a drone, each one listening. He reached out and touched the display, and the dots pulsed gently under his fingers, like a heartbeat. "Almost time," he whispered. The Grand Convocation happened once every galactic cycle, roughly 14 Earth months. It was the single most important event on the Council's calendar, a ceremony where all senior species gathered their fleets at Verath Prime, renewed their alliances, and reminded each other and the rest of the galaxy that they were in charge. Every major warship, every flagship, every command vessel was recalled from patrol and border duty to form a wall of metal and light around the station. It was a show of unity, a display of overwhelming power. It was also the one time each year when the rest of Council space was left almost completely unguarded. Nate Dawson had studied the convocation schedule for months. Claire had mapped every fleet movement, every arrival time, every docking pattern. Danny Greer had confirmed the communication protocols that would be active during the ceremony. Leo Voss had quietly repositioned his drones into their final configuration. And on Callisto, Sam Harlan's 26 ships sat in their bays, engines warm, crews ready, waiting for one signal. The morning of the convocation, Nate put on his formal diplomatic uniform, a dark blue suit with Earth's emblem on the chest. He looked at himself in the mirror of his quarters and adjusted his collar. His hands were steady. Claire came in wearing her usual black. She carried a small device in her pocket, no bigger than a coin. It was a quantum-linked transmitter connected directly to Katie Morgan's command center on Earth. One press, and it would send a single coded pulse across 8 light-years in less than a second. "You ready?" she asked. Nate turned from the mirror. "I've been ready for 6 months." They walked together through the station's wide corridors toward the Grand Chamber. The hallways were crowded with delegates from every species, hundreds of beings in every shape and size imaginable. Some walked on 2 legs, others on 4 or 6. Some floated, some crawled along the walls. The air smelled like 100 different atmospheres mixed together, filtered through the station's recyclers into something breathable but strange. The Grand Chamber was the largest room on Verath Prime. It was shaped like a bowl, with tiered seating rising in concentric rings around a central platform where Valeth stood, tall and still, its 4 arms folded behind its back. Floating above the platform was a holographic display showing the positions of every fleet gathered outside. Over 300 warships hung in formation around the station, their running lights blinking like a field of stars. Nate took his seat in the human section. It was still the smallest section, tucked into the upper tier where the view was worst. Below them, the senior delegates took their places with the practiced ease of beings who had done this many times before. Valeth began the ceremony. Its layered voice filled the chamber, speaking words of unity and strength that it had probably spoken 100 times. The delegates listened with respectful attention, though Nate noticed a few of them glancing at their personal devices when they thought no one was watching. The ceremony lasted 2 hours. Alliances were reaffirmed. Trade pacts were renewed. A few minor disputes were settled with formal handshakes, and gestures that passed for handshakes among species that did not have hands. At no point was Earth mentioned. At no point was Nate invited to speak. He did not mind. He was not there to speak. Not yet. At exactly 1400 Galactic Standard Time, Claire reached into her pocket and pressed the transmitter. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then every light in the Grand Chamber flickered. The holographic display above Valeth's platform scrambled, dissolved into static, and went dark. The ambient lighting stuttered. Communication panels along the chamber walls flashed red, then went black. A low alarm began to sound, then cut off abruptly, as though someone had pulled a plug. Across 200 light-years of space, every single communication relay in Council territory shut down at the same moment. Leo Voss's 312 drones, which had been sitting silently in the void for months, activated their secondary systems simultaneously. Each drone emitted a focused electromagnetic pulse tuned precisely to the frequency of the nearest relay. The pulses did not destroy the relays. They simply overwhelmed them, flooding their receivers with noise that made it impossible to send or receive any signal. The effect was instant and total. Every council species lost contact with its homeworld. Every fleet lost contact with its command structure. Every colony, every outpost, every listening station went silent. In the space of a heartbeat, the most powerful civilization in the galaxy was deaf, blind, and alone. In the Grand Chamber, chaos erupted. Delegates leaped from their seats. Military commanders grabbed for communication devices that returned nothing but static. Valeth's composure cracked for the first time anyone could remember. Its forearms unfolded and spread wide as it turned in a circle, its dark eyes scanning the chamber for answers that no one could give. "What is happening?" Valeth's voice boomed across the chamber. "Restore communications immediately." Technicians scrambled to the control panels along the walls. They worked frantically, rebooting systems, rerouting signals, trying every backup protocol in the book. Nothing worked. Every time a relay came back online, it was knocked down again within seconds. Danny Greer's disruption protocol was adaptive. It learned, it adjusted. It was always one step ahead. Nate Dawson sat in his chair and did not move. His hands rested calmly on his knees. His face showed nothing. Claire sat beside him with the same stillness. She watched the chamber descend into panic with the quiet attention of someone watching a fire she had set herself. 15 minutes passed, then 30, then an hour. The senior delegates began arguing with each other. The military commanders from different species started positioning their personal guards around their sections of the chamber. Trust was unraveling in real time. Without communication, without coordination, every species was on its own, and every species knew it. Outside the station, the 300 warships that had gathered for the convocation began to drift apart. Without orders from their respective commands, individual captains started making their own decisions. Some moved to protect their homeworld's direction. Others held position, unsure of what to do. A few powered up weapons, not aiming at anything in particular, just wanting to feel less helpless. And then, at 12 strategic points across Council space, 26 small black ships appeared out of nothing. Admiral Katie Morgan stood on the bridge of the lead vessel, a ship called the Thorn. She was calm. Her bridge crew, men and women she had hand-picked for this mission, worked their stations with quiet efficiency. On the main display, she could see the positions of all 26 ships. Each one had emerged from quantum slip at a gravitational choke point, a narrow corridor of stable space where ships had to pass to reach the most important supply routes and stations in the sector. The human ships did not fire. They did not need to. Their presence alone was the message. They were sitting in the doorways of the galaxy's most critical highways, and no one could move them because no one could coordinate a response. Sam Harlan stood on the bridge of his own vessel, 3 systems away from Katie. He took a deep breath and opened a broadcast channel. His signal cut through the static because Danny Greer had built the human communication network on a completely separate system that the drones did not touch. His voice went out on every frequency, in every language the translation systems could handle. "This is General Sam Harlan of United Earth Command. Earth requests a conversation." The words reached Vareth Prime 40 seconds later through a direct beam laser that Claire had secretly installed in the human quarters months ago. The message played through the one working speaker in the Grand Chamber, the one built into the human delegation's podium. Every head in the chamber turned toward Nate Dawson. He looked up at Valeth. The Arbiter's dark eyes stared back at him. For the first time, there was something new in those ancient eyes. Not anger, not confusion, fear. Nate did not smile. He did not gloat. He simply folded his hands on the podium in front of him and waited for someone to answer. 3 days passed, and the galaxy held its breath. On Verath Prime, the Grand Chamber had become something between a war room and a prison. No delegate was willing to leave. No delegate was willing to trust the others enough to sleep. The tiered seating, arranged so carefully for ceremony, now looked like a cage, with hundreds of the galaxy's most powerful beings trapped inside. Unable to call for help, unable to coordinate, unable to do anything but sit and watch each other with growing suspicion. The Council's greatest military minds worked around the clock to restore the communication network. Teams of engineers from 7 different species set up temporary relay boosters in the corridors outside the chamber. Each time they brought one online, it held for 8 seconds, sometimes 12, before Danny Greer's drones found the new frequency, adapted, and shut it down again. The engineers would try a different approach. The drones would adjust. It was like trying to bail water out of a boat with a cup, while someone poked new holes in the hull. On the second day, a Rithian admiral named Soketh, a broad creature with gray skin and 6 eyes that blinked independently, proposed a direct military strike against the human ships. His species controlled the largest single fleet at Verath Prime, 84 heavy cruisers. He argued that brute force could overwhelm the humans, regardless of their tricks. The problem was coordination. Soketh's fleet used Rithian encrypted channels. The Vel Dominion's ships used a completely different system. The Keth Collective communicated through chemical signals that had no electronic equivalent. Without the central relay network that tied all Council species together, each fleet was an island. Soketh could order his own ships to attack, but he could not guarantee that the other fleets would support him. And if they did not, if they misread his movements and assumed he was acting aggressively toward them rather than the humans, the situation could spiral into chaos among the Council species themselves. Soketh sat back down. His 6 eyes blinked in sequence, and he said nothing more. By the 3rd day, the cracks were showing. 2 smaller species had quietly moved their ships out of formation and positioned them along escape routes toward their home systems. A trade dispute between the Vel Dominion and the Keth Collective, which had been simmering for decades, flared into a heated argument on the chamber floor, when a Keth delegate accused a Vel commander of repositioning ships to block Keth territory access. The accusation was probably true. Without oversight, everyone was looking out for themselves. Nate Dawson watched all of this from his seat in the upper tier. He had not spoken since Sam Harlan's broadcast. He did not need to. Every hour that passed without the humans making a demand, without them firing a shot, without them explaining themselves, the anxiety in the chamber grew. The Council was used to being the ones who made others wait. They were not used to waiting themselves. On the morning of the 4th day, Valith approached the human delegation section. It was the first time a senior arbiter had ever walked to the human seats, rather than summoning the human ambassador to the floor. Claire noticed this. She made sure everyone else noticed it too. Valith stood before Nate, towering over him. Its voice was quieter than usual, stripped of the ceremonial weight it usually carried. Ambassador Dawson, your people have made their point. Will you speak? Nate looked up at the arbiter. He took a slow breath and then stood. Yes, he said. I will. He walked down the steps to the central platform. Claire followed him, carrying a data pad. Every delegate, every commander, every advisor turned to watch the human who had sat quietly for 3 days, while their world fell apart around them. Nate stood at the center of the platform, where Valith usually stood. He looked out at the assembled faces, the eyes, the sensors, the antenna, the countless ways that alien beings perceived the world. He saw anger in some, confusion in others, and in more than a few, something that surprised him. Curiosity. 322 days ago, Nate began, his voice clear and steady. This council voted to reclassify humanity as a contained development species. We were not told. We were not consulted. We were not given the chance to speak. Our solar system was open to resource extraction without our consent. Our colonies were ordered to reduce their populations. Our freedom of movement was restricted to a corridor smaller than some of your species' private estates. The chamber was so quiet that the hum of the station's systems was the only sound. We protested. We filed objections. We followed every procedure this council has. And we were ignored. Every single time. Claire stepped forward and tapped her datapad. The chamber's holographic display, which she had connected to the human delegation's independent power supply, flickered to life above the platform. Files began scrolling across the display. Documents, recordings, intercepted communications. These are records obtained from your own communication networks over the past 6 months, Nate continued. They show that the Vel Dominion and the Rithian Empire made a secret agreement to divide Earth's asteroid belt between them, before the containment vote was even held. They show that the Keth Collective conducted illegal biological experiments on 3 pre-spaceflight civilizations in the Outer Rim, experiments that violated Article 12 of the Council's own charter. They show that Valeth personally approved the suppression of 17 petitions from minor species requesting fair trade terms. The chamber erupted. Delegates from a dozen species began shouting. Valeth's 4 arms tightened against its body. Soketh's 6 eyes went wide. The Keth delegates' chemical signals filled the air with a sharp, bitter smell that the translators could not process. Nate raised his hand, and something remarkable happened. The chamber quieted. Not because he had authority, not because he had power, but because every being in that room suddenly understood that the human standing on the platform was the only one who could turn the lights back on. We did not come here to destroy this council, Nate said. We did not come here to start a war. If we had wanted war, your fleets would be dark by now, not just your relays. We came here because you gave us no other choice. And now, for the first time in the history of this body, you are going to listen. He laid out Earth's terms. The containment order was to be dissolved immediately, with all records of it erased from the Council Charter. Earth was to be granted full senior standing, with the same voting rights and protections as any founding species. An independent oversight body was to be established, with human representation, to audit all council decisions and prevent the kind of backroom deals that had led to this moment. Any species that interfered with human sovereignty in the future would face the same blackout. But Nate made it clear that next time, the drones would not simply blind the relays, they would destroy them permanently. And one more thing, Nate added. Every species classified as juvenile or contained will be given the opportunity to petition for reclassification under fair and transparent review. What was done to us will not be done to anyone else. Silence hung in the chamber like smoke after a fire. Valeth stared at Nate for a long time. The Arbiter's dark eyes moved slowly, processing, calculating. Then it spoke, and its voice was heavy with something Nate had never heard from it before. Defeat. How long have you been planning this, Ambassador? Nate did not answer. He glanced at Claire. She stepped forward, looked directly at Valeth, and said, "Since the day you told us we didn't matter." The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. Ripples spread outward through the chamber. Delegates exchanged glances. Military commanders stared at their useless communication devices. And somewhere, deep in the silence, the balance of power in the galaxy shifted on its axis. Nate turned and walked back to his seat. He sat down, folded his hands, and waited. He was very good at waiting now. The Council ratified Earth's terms in 6 days. It was the fastest legislative action in the body's 12,000-year history, a fact that was not lost on anyone. The containment order was dissolved. The records were erased, though Claire made sure that copies existed in places the Council would never find. Earth was granted full senior standing, and Nate Dawson's small seat in the upper tier of the Grand Chamber was replaced with a full delegation section on the main floor, complete with the same banners and display panels that every other senior species enjoyed. The surveyor ships in Earth's asteroid belt packed up their drills and left within a week. The population reduction orders for Titan and Europa were formally rescinded. Governor Pete Langford read the rescission notice in his office, set it down on the same desk where he had read the original order, and allowed himself a small, quiet smile. On Europa, Maria Reeves gathered her colony staff and told them the news. For the first time in months, someone in the room laughed. But the ripples of what Earth had done spread far beyond the solar system. Within days of the convocation, Nate began receiving messages. They came through official channels and unofficial ones, through encrypted signals and handwritten notes slipped under the door of the human delegation's quarters. They came from species that Nate had barely heard of, small civilizations that occupied single star systems, or modest clusters on the edges of Council space. Species that had been classified as juvenile or contained for centuries. Species that had been exploited, ignored, or simply forgotten. They all wanted the same thing. They wanted to talk. The first to arrive in person was a delegate from the Surl, a quiet, slender species with silver skin and large, dark eyes. Their representative, whose name translated roughly to Keeper of Still Waters, sat across from Nate in a small meeting room off the main corridor, and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "We have been contained for 400 years, the Keeper said. Our homeworld's oceans were drained by the Vel Dominion to fuel their cooling systems. We filed 917 petitions. None were answered." The Keeper paused and looked at Nate with those wide, dark eyes. "You are the first senior species to say that what was done to us should not happen again. We would like to know if you meant it." Nate held the Keeper's gaze. "I meant every word." Over the following weeks, Claire Sutton built something new. She reached out to the Surl, to the Drenith, to the Pale Collective, to a dozen other small species who had been waiting for someone to open a door. She created a secure communication network independent of the Council's relay system, using modified versions of Danny Greer's quantum-linked channels. It was small at first, just 12 species sharing intelligence, coordinating trade, and watching each other's backs. But it grew quickly. They called it the Terran Compact, though the name was Claire's idea, and Nate always insisted it should be called something less dramatic. Claire told him he had no sense of branding. Back on Earth, the aftermath played out in laboratories and shipyards as much as in diplomatic halls. Dr. Leo Voss, who had spent the better part of 3 years working in a bunker under the desert, finally came up for air. He stood outside the Nevada facility's surface entrance, squinting in the sunlight, and breathed in warm, dry air that tasted like dust and freedom. His team followed him out, one by one. Megan Holt stretched her arms above her head and complained that she had forgotten what the sun looked like. Danny Greer immediately pulled out his phone and checked messages he had missed for 6 months. Leo published a carefully edited version of the stealth drone technology, removing the military applications, but keeping the core communication and sensor capabilities. He offered it to any species that joined the compact, giving them the ability to build their own independent communication networks that did not rely on Council infrastructure. It was a small thing technically, but politically, it was enormous. For the first time, small species could talk to each other without the Council listening in. Megan Holt led the team that adapted the quantum slip drive for civilian use. The military version allowed short-range jumps within a star system. The civilian version was slower and less precise, but it opened up new travel corridors that bypassed the traditional routes controlled by the senior council species. Within a year, trade ships from compact species were moving goods along paths that the council had never mapped and could not tax. Admiral Katie Morgan retired from active command on a Tuesday afternoon. She signed the papers in her Geneva office, shook hands with her staff, and walked out into the cool Swiss air. She had led the most significant military operation in human history without firing a single shot, and she intended to spend the rest of her days reminding people that the best weapon was the one you never had to use. Sam Harlan took over United Earth Command. His first act was to invite military representatives from compact species to observe human training exercises. His second act was to begin joint defense planning with any species willing to participate. The goal was not to build an army to rival the Council. The goal was to make sure that no single power could ever act unchecked again. Danny Greer was promoted to head of Earth's Signal Intelligence Division. He moved into an office that was slightly larger than a closet, filled it with equipment, and continued doing what he did best, listening. His drones were still out there, still watching, still recording. The Council knew about them now, but knowing about them and being able to find them were two very different things. The Galactic Council still existed. It still held sessions. Valith still presided, though its voice carried less certainty than before. The senior species still outnumbered Earth and its allies by a wide margin. But the dynamic had changed in a way that could not be undone. Before, the Council operated on the assumption that power flowed from the top down, that the species who had been in space the longest held the right to decide the fate of those who came after. That assumption was broken now, not shattered violently, but cracked down the middle, like a pane of glass that still held together, but could never again pretend to be whole. Some Council species adapted. The Rithians, surprisingly, were among the first to reach out to the Compact for trade negotiations. Soketh, the admiral who had proposed attacking the human fleet, personally visited Earth and spent a week touring human cities with an expression of grudging respect on his broad gray face. Others did not adapt. The Vel Dominion withdrew its ambassador from Verath Prime and retreated behind its borders, nursing its wounded pride and whispering about revenge. She always kept a close watch on everyone. On a warm evening 6 months after the convocation, Nate Dawson sat in a small bar on the outskirts of Houston. The place was nothing special. Wooden tables, dim lighting, a jukebox in the corner, playing something old and slow. Through the window, the Texas sky stretched out wide and dark, filled with more stars than a person could count in a lifetime. Claire Sutton sat across from him. She had traded her usual black for a dark blue jacket, which Nate considered a major concession to casualness. 2 glasses of bourbon sat between them on the table. "The Vel Dominion is building new ships," Claire said, because she could never fully stop working, even in a bar. "I know," Nate said. "The Keth Collective has been reaching out to species outside the Council, trying to build their own alliances. I know that too." Claire picked up her glass and looked at it. "You think they'll come at us again?" Nate considered the question. He thought about the Grand Chamber and the look in Valith's eyes when the lights went out. He thought about the Keeper of Still Waters and the 917 petitions that no one had answered. He thought about Pete Langford on Titan, and Maria Reeves on Europa, and Leo Voss blinking in the Nevada sunlight, and Megan Holt with oil on her hands, and Danny Greer cracking codes that had stood for 8 centuries. He thought about all the things humanity had built in the dark, while the galaxy looked the other way. "They will," he said. "Every empire does, eventually. Someone always decides that the old way was better, that they deserve to be on top, that the newcomers need to be put back in their place." He picked up his glass and took a slow sip. The bourbon was smooth and warm going down. "But now they know the cost," he said. and that changes the math. She raised her glass slightly, a toast without words, and drank. Outside the window, the stars burned on. They have been burning for billions of years, long before any species had looked up and wondered what was out there. They would keep burning long after the Council and the Compact, and every alliance that anyone had ever built, turned to dust. But tonight, for the first time in the long and often lonely history of the human race, not a single one of those stars was out of reach. And somewhere in the dark between them, 312 tiny machines drifted silently through the void, watching, listening, and waiting. Nate Dawson had never liked the cold. Growing up in the green hills of Virginia, he had always preferred warm summers and the sound of crickets at night. But there were no crickets on Varath Prime. There was no warmth either. The Council's central station was a massive ring of dark metal and pale light, floating in orbit around a dying star that gave off a dull orange glow. Everything about the place felt old, ancient, like the galaxy had already made up its mind about how things should work, and humanity had shown up too late to have a say in it. He stood at the viewport of the human delegation's quarters, looking out at the curve of the station. Ships from dozens of species drifted past, some as large as mountains, others sleek and fast like silver needles. Earth's shuttle, parked in a far docking bay, looked like a toy next to them. "You're staring again," Claire Sutton said from behind him. She was sitting at a narrow desk, scrolling through encrypted files on a tablet. Her voice was flat, the way it always was when she was thinking about something she did not like. "Just counting ships," Nate said quietly. "Don't bother. I already did. There are over 600 docked right now. 12 species have capital-class vessels. We have a shuttle and a bad attitude." Nate turned from the window. Claire had short brown hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She had spent 15 years in Navy intelligence before being assigned as his chief advisor, and she had told him on their first day together that she did not trust a single species on this station. He had laughed at the time. He was not laughing anymore. Earth had been admitted to the Galactic Council only 2 years ago. It was supposed to be a proud moment for humanity, a sign that they had finally reached the stars and earned their place among the civilizations that had been traveling between them for thousands of years. But it had not taken long for Nate to realize that a place did not mean an equal place. Humanity was classified as a juvenile species. They were allowed to attend sessions, speak when invited, and vote on minor issues that affected no one important. The real decisions were made behind closed doors by the senior races, species that had been part of the Council for centuries and saw humans the way humans might look at a dog that had learned to walk on 2 legs. Amusing, but not serious. The session that morning had been routine, or so Nate had believed. He had sat in the human delegation's small seat at the far edge of the chamber, while representatives from the senior species discussed trade agreements, border patrols, and resource allocations. The chamber itself was enormous, a circular hall with tiered seating carved from dark stone, lit by floating orbs that cast a blue-white glow over everything. Each species had its own section, decorated with banners and symbols that Nate could not read. The human section had a single flag and 2 chairs. He had been half listening to a debate about mineral rights in the outer systems when Valeth, the senior arbiter of the Council, rose to speak. Valeth was tall, nearly 9 feet, with a body covered in dark-plated chitin, and 4 arms that folded neatly behind its back when it was not gesturing. Its voice was deep and layered, as though 3 voices were speaking at once. It was the most powerful being in the chamber, and it knew it. Valeth announced that the Council had completed a review of humanity's development trajectory and had voted to reclassify Earth under Provision 714 of the Council Charter. Nate did not know what Provision 714 was. He looked at Claire, who was already searching for it on her tablet. Her face went pale. "Contained development species," she whispered. "Nate, they just put us in a cage." The provision allowed any senior council race to enter Earth's solar system and harvest resources without permission. It restricted human travel to the space between Earth and Mars. It authorized genetic monitoring of all human colonies. And it had been voted on and ratified without Earth being told, consulted, or given the chance to object. Nate stood up in the chamber, heads turned, Valeth's dark eyes fixed on him with the kind of patience a teacher might show a child who had spoken out of turn. "When was this vote held?" Nate asked. His voice did not shake, though his hands did. "3 rotations ago," Valeth said calmly. "The matter was resolved efficiently. Earth was not informed. Juvenile species are not required to be present for reclassification reviews. This is consistent with Council protocol." Nate felt the anger rise in his chest, hot and sharp. He wanted to shout, to slam his fist on the podium, to tell this towering insect that humanity would not be treated like livestock. But he was a diplomat. He had been trained to keep his voice even when his blood was boiling. "I formally protest this decision on behalf of Earth and all human territories," he said. Valeth tilted its head slightly. "Your protest is noted. It changes nothing. The provision is now in effect." The chamber moved on to the next item on the agenda, as though nothing had happened. Nate sat down. Claire reached over and gripped his arm. Her jaw was tight. "I recorded everything," she said under her breath. "Every word." That night, Nate sent a priority message to Earth through the delegation's secure channel. It reached Admiral Katie Morgan at United Earth Command Headquarters in Geneva within 6 hours. Katie was a woman of 53, with gray streaks in her dark hair and a reputation for staying calm in situations that made other people panic. She read the message twice, then closed her office door and made 2 calls. The first was to General Sam Harlan, a broad-shouldered man with a thick Southern accent who had commanded Earth's orbital defense forces for nearly a decade. The second was to Dr. Leo Voss, a quiet, intense physicist who ran Earth's Advanced Research Division from a lab buried deep under the Nevada desert. The 3 of them met in a secure room with no windows. Katie laid out what had happened. Sam leaned back in his chair and rubbed his face with both hands. Leo simply listened, his fingers steepled under his chin. "Diplomacy is dead," Katie said. "But if we fight them head-on, we lose. Their fleets outnumber ours 100 to 1. "Then we don't fight head-on," Leo said softly. Sam looked at him. "What do you have in mind?" Leo's eyes were steady. Something they will never see coming. 8 light-years away, Claire Sutton sat alone in the human quarters on Verath Prime. She typed a coded message and sent it through a channel that no council sensor could detect. The message was short. "They don't fear us. That is their first mistake.